This is for Friday, February 27th, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. in the Great Hall, 4 through 6. The interviewer is Laurie Segall. This is for a new code for AI.
Good afternoon. Please silence your devices. The session is about to begin. For continuing education credits, check into this session on the Forum app. Questions? Stop by the registration desk or email the Forum team at forum@commonfund.org.
You've been out doing the most when I need you most. Yeah. I'ma do the same thing that you've been doing. I'ma do the same thing that you've been doing. You can call it love, but I see right through it. Two can play the same game. I was thinking you were leaving every weekend, so deceiving. On an island, I decided to let you go. To let you go. To let you go.
Please welcome CF Private Equity Managing Director Luke Rossiter.
Water or anything? Good afternoon. Our final session of the day looks at a well-trodden topic, AI, from a different perspective. We have two tremendous speakers to take us on a hopeful journey to a future where AI and technology innovation transform our world for the better. Vilas Dhar is an inspiring voice of hope and engagement for an AI-enabled, human-centered future. He serves as the president and trustee of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, a 21st century, $1.5 billion philanthropy advancing AI and data solutions to create a thriving and sustainable future for all. He is the US government-nominated expert to the Global Partnership on AI, a member of the OECD AI Futures Working Group, and the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on AI, and has served as a member of the UN Secretary's General High-Level Advisory Body on Artificial Intelligence. He advises governments, institutions, and regulatory bodies on AI policy, digital governance, and ethical technology. He chairs the Center for Trustworthy Technology, serves on the Advisory Council of Stanford's Institute for Human-Centered AI, and teaches AI ethics to a global audience through his LinkedIn Learning course, which has reached over 500,000 learners. We are also fortunate to have Laurie Segall in the discussion today. Laurie has spent over a decade at the front lines of tech, covering the rise of Silicon Valley, the evolution of AI, and how innovation is reshaping our world. As CNN's former senior tech correspondent and a reporter for 60 Minutes, she's had rare, behind-the-scenes access to some of the most influential figures in Silicon Valley. Has been the go-to reporter for interviews with the titans of the tech world, including Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, and OpenAI's Sam Altman, to name just a few. But her work goes beyond just reporting on big names. She's always been focused on the bigger questions. How is technology shaping our culture? Who gets a say in the future we're building? And what are the real human costs of innovation? Now she's taking her storytelling a step further with Mostly Human, an entertainment company at the intersection of tech and culture. Partnering with major Hollywood studios, Mostly Human explores the human impact of AI and emerging technologies, making sure the conversation about our digital future is inclusive, compelling, and impossible to ignore. Please join me in welcoming both Laurie and Vilas to the forum stage.
Hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
I'm so excited to be here. And my goal is to make this interesting enough that people just don't want to go to the beach and they want to be here. Wow, we have so much to talk about. And really quick announcement, we're going to do questions at the end. So if you have questions for Vilas for the, I would say, 10, 15 minutes before we end, we're going to open it up. So
Perfect.
Where should we start? Let's start, I want to go back to my personal experience of like 2009. They were just saying, covering folks like Sam Altman, little company at the time, Looped, before he started OpenAI. Companies like Airbnb, Uber, we saw this incredible moment of like the democratization of information and giving everyone a voice. Fast forward all these years later, there were good, there was bad, but there was extraordinary human impact. And now, Vilas, we're sitting here witnessing one of the most extraordinary tech accelerations of our time. How does this moment compare to tech cycles of the past?
What a question, I love it. Laurie, first of all, thanks for being here with me, and thanks to the Commonfund folks for bringing us. Look, I want to answer your question. I'll do it through two experiences just over the last 7 days that have really stayed with me. The first was what you might expect. I sat with a very recognizable CEO of a Fortune 50 company. We were in Munich at the security conference, and he pulls me aside and he says, we've just spent $400 million on AI enablement inside of our company, and we haven't been able to find a single bit of productivity gain. What's going on? That's one line.
Wow.
Not said on MSNBC, not said in public, but this is the question that they're asking. Okay, put that to the side for a second. I'll tell you the second one. I was just in India for the AI Global Summit that Prime Minister Modi brought together. And I sat for hours of incredible conversations with local civil society organizations. And this 23-year-old woman came and showed me this AI-driven app that we've created that lets her go into a last-mile village, go to a young woman who's having her first child. And this 23-year-old with no formal medical training can now diagnose, triage, and provide meaningful life-saving advice to a woman about as far away from the tech world as you can imagine. It was a $2 app, and maybe creating the whole thing cost $25,000. That now has the potential to reshape the lives of tens of millions of people. These are the two stories of the greatest period of tech acceleration we've ever experienced. On one side, this massive investment, searching after I'm not quite sure what. We often talk about an AI arms race or AGI or something else. And on the other, real people who are building real amazing tools that maybe go back to that promise you started with your question of democratizing information, of making sure people can build things that make the world a better place. It's the reality of the moment is we've got two very different stories out there and a lot of headlines on the first and not so many on the second.
Yeah, that's astounding. And I saw something you said about you spent 25 years as a computer scientist in building artificial intelligence. You wear many hats. I mean, I was in my deep research of you. You're a lawyer, you've done computer science, you're advising governments, pretty incredible. And you said, I deeply believe this is the largest transformation humanity has ever experienced. I mean, coming from you, that's cred.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely, and, right? I've spent my whole life at the intersection of two things. On one side, what you described, I've seen three major cycles in tech pretty much from start to finish, right? The rise of the internet, which totally transformed the world in many ways. The rise of social media, which probably also transformed the world, not in many ways that I particularly like or care for. And now this third moment, this rise of AI. On one side, there are so many stories of promise. And yet, we also forget all the lessons that we seem to have ignored the first and the second time through. What happens when you unleash a technology without putting any social guardrails around it? What happens when you let people have access to tooling without asking them questions about how they're going to use it in moral and ethical ways? What happens when you release these tools first to the first world, to the developed economies, and then tell everybody else they'll catch up eventually? We have a set of choices to make right now that feel more important than ever, and yet we're spending almost no time talking about them.
I would love to kind of dig into how we distribute power, but just since I have you here, and because there's so much going on every day in the headlines, and I know we're not going to do too many headlines, but Pentagon, Anthropic, how many folks are following what's happening right now with the Pentagon and Anthropic? Okay, good amount of folks.
Yeah.
I mean, you're behind the scenes talking to all these folks. What does this moment represent when it comes to AI and civil society?
Let me provide a little bit of a brief on what's happening, and then I have to be somewhat careful so I don't front-run things that are happening in the moment. But I told Laurie before I came out here, I'm happy to talk about anything, so let's do it. So the storyline here is Anthropic, one of the major AI providers, has created something called Claude. Claude is an AI model that's deeply embedded now in all kinds of government activities, including a whole set of classified activities that are very involved in how the Department of War is progressing their activities around the world. Anthropic, being a company that was actually formed by a set of people who left OpenAI because they didn't believe that company had enough protections in place, have started from the idea that they're going to have a frame on safety, on moral use, and it's going to be embedded in every product. As you might imagine, that's a good storyline until it hits kind of the US bureaucracy. And what's happened just over the last week, has been reported, is the CEO of the company, Dario Amodei, has been dragged into the Pentagon to meet with the Secretary of War and told that he needs to provide the models that the company is creating, but minus the safeguards that the company has said have to be there. And in this moment, we have something really exceptional happening here in the United States. We have the government interacting with a private company and saying, if you don't do a set of things that we're asking you to do, we're going to apply some pretty draconian pressure, including invoking the Defense Production Act and a whole set of other regulatory rules. Okay, that's what's happening. Why does any of this matter? On one side, we don't have that many companies that have meaningful frontier AI models. You can really count them on one, maybe 1.5 hands, right? So if these companies are being put under this kind of pressure to do things like make sure the model's available for, if the government ever decided to use it that way, autonomous weapons use, to let missiles fly at the direction of AI, or for the mass surveillance of people, we've set up a conflict between two very core values of American liberalism. On one side, the independence of the private sector. On the other, the importance of national security and defense. As you can tell, this conversation really has nothing to do with AI. It's actually a little bit about the soul of our country, and it's happening in real time as we sit here at deadlines fast approaching, I think in the next hour and a half, for this company to either say, we're gonna do what the government tells us, or we're gonna draw a line in the sand. And in that moment is gonna be a pretty significant indictment of everything we think we know about what tech can mean for humanity.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch this play out. And I think this would lead me to the next question, which is, you talk a lot about the power being centered, tech power being centered in the hands of few. And a lot of your work is really focused on restructuring and distributing that type of power. So how can we allow communities to be the architects of the technology that serves them? It's
a beautiful question. Let's name the problem very clearly. Ken came out last night on this stage and he talked about sovereign wealth and sovereign debt, and particularly what's happening here in the United States. I want to share with you a frame that's going to tie very closely to that. The 5 largest companies, if you take a look at what they're saying in terms of their CapEx expectations over the next 5 years, and you convert it to the debt and equity they're going to need to take on to deliver it, pretty much outstrips something like 80% of the world's countries in terms of their overall debt load. We're talking about this massive concentration of quasi-sovereign debt in 5 to 6 private sector companies. And you might ask the question, well, who holds that debt? The answer is actually very straightforward. It's in many ways the people that are in this room and the institutions we represent, along with public investors all around the world. So on one side, you have this massive concentration of debt and economic power, but you don't have the counterbalancing democratic processes and public accountability that governments, at least in principle, hold. And you have a significant amount of concentrated economic risk. So that's the macroeconomic case. How does that translate into what I think you and I care about and so many people in the room do, which is what does this actually mean for our society? I think we see over and over again, and as I said, we just came back from Delhi where we met with organizations from across the planet who are stepping forward over and over again and saying, you know, we have really significant problems that are right at the frontiers of computer science. We want to understand climate change at global levels. We want to understand how to apply supercomputing-based weather models to better predict ocean rise, and a litany of others. And then they'll say, but we don't have access to any of the stack that we need in order to be able to deliver against that. We don't have access to compute because all the chips are being bought up by the major companies. We don't have access to data because the only data that's provided is the data that's commercially valuable. We don't have access to talent because it's all getting hired. So what do we have? We have this massive diversion of these resources to these companies that are chasing that kind of almost boogeyman goal of AGI. And we got the rest of the world trying to solve real problems, but don't have access to the basic building blocks. How do we fix that? In many ways, that's a classic market failure, right? We have the hyper concentration of resources around things that are actually fundamentally, maybe, not particularly productive for our economy. This is where we have to have a different approach. And I think in many ways, again, for the civil society and public institutions that are in the room, the moment of real agency, which is how do you bring a meaningful aggregation of capital to say, we're going to build an alternate way forward. We're seeing this happen. Last year in Paris, I announced with President Macron and a number of others a $2.5 billion facility that's funded by philanthropies, by governments, by institutions around the world to build AI capacity outside of the private sector. This means building public compute resources, building data sets, training people, and giving them ways to work that have economic dignity, that have wages equal to the private sector, but to work on public sector problems. And I have to tell you, it's easy to say there's a lot of bad stories, but to me, that's a real story of hope. Because we're seeing that when you create the opportunity, lots and lots of people want to be a part of it. And we're seeing the momentum around that movement growing at scale.
Take us to those closed door meetings with the prime ministers. I mean, you're in the room where it happens. What are you hearing from them about, what's working and what's not? And specifically, could you give us some examples of where you've seen this actually work out?
Yeah. I'll give you a look at this just from the last few weeks, because again, we're right at the breaking edge of a whole bunch of changes. We saw Prime Minister Carney's speech where he came out both at Davos and then at the Munich Security Conference talking about the power of middle powers, right? These rising institutions and the role these countries need to play. When you go into the closed rooms, you hear the same messages, but with a significantly higher level of edge. Because I think countries are realizing that they are, if they're not the United States and China, if they're not maybe the other 5 countries that follow on that list in terms of AI capacity, they are effectively left out of a global conversation about the future of AI. And countries realize it. Because of that, this conversation about AI capacity is quickly moving from how do we build the tech stack to what is the new form of geopolitic that allows for relevance and participation in this new world. Some of the stories that I think people in this room have probably heard a lot about is the emerging new bipolar world, the US versus China dynamic. And we're seeing it in the form of AI, the US pushing American dominance in the form of private companies that have to build the stack of AI for the world. The Chinese that are coming out and saying we have a centralized government model that will provide for almost free as a part of our One Belt, One Road initiative, as a part of our development work. And then everybody else saying, wait, I don't actually want to be a part of either of those systems at this point. Where do I go and where do I look? And I think that is the subject of most of those conversations. Yeah. I'll give you one other quick vignette on this just because you asked the question, and I'll take you to a very specific room in Delhi last week. And you might imagine that you know who was around that table, right? It was several heads of state. It was the CEOs of the 5 major tech companies, right? We know them now by their first names, right? Sam and Dario and Demis and Sundar and Satya.
And by the image where they didn't hold hands.
Yeah, well, of
this
course,
got a lot
there.
of headlines if you were looking.
Do you want to tell them about this?
Well, it's just they were. It was a photo op where they just weren't holding hands. People were kind of like putting their arms up and they didn't. And apparently that became a headline.
Yeah, it was a headline. It was incredibly awkward in the moment,
Yeah.
Laurie. And a little bit of Schadenfreude as you kind of watch this. But I'll tell you the point of the story is you have all these people in a room, and then one civil society voice, which is us. I don't say this to you as a mark of pride that, hey, look, we were in the room. I say it actually as a great disappointment that for a decade we've been building this incredibly robust set of institutions around the world that are now guiding AI policy, representing communities and building this, that are technical leads. We built centers of excellence in AI around the world that rival where a lot of the frontier labs are. And yet the mainstream narrative here is these 5 tech companies are the only ones worth being in the discussion. Yeah. The fact that we were there and could push back on that, I think, was really important. But we need to fundamentally shift where we think as a society AI is being created and where it's being deployed. And the more we feed into the narrative that these 5 or 6 companies are the only ones who have capacity, the harder it gets to rebalance that over time.
And there are so many reasons to be optimistic. I mean, I cover some of the darkest things in the internet, the darkest corners, and I'm still such an optimist about it because I think technology has such extraordinary potential. Yeah. Some examples of, in California, AI now scanning for fires. There's something called Cushy Baby. I mean, would you get into some of these specifics around where we're actually seeing these types of technologies working for communities?
Absolutely, and this is my favorite thing to do in the world because we have built and supported hundreds of these things around the world. Let me give you a few examples that start from the very micro all the way up to the macro. I'll start with disaster resilience, something I think a lot about as our world is physically changing around us. And there's a story of villages that are particularly subject to landslides and mudslides in various parts of the world. Landslides and mudslides are a really local phenomenon. Often you get a climate change that leads to a lot of rainfall. Obviously, it destabilizes some local kind of dirt and hills. And villages often have only like 15 to 25 minutes of warning before their entire village is surrounded by mud. Okay, this is a problem that is endemic across the developing world. We don't have an answer to it until now. We worked with a team who said, wait, we can solve this pretty easily. They used a set of very low-cost sensors. These are things that cost $5 to $7. They embedded them around these villages in kind of almost semi-random ways. They built an AI model that takes those sensor readings and tracks it to a model they built that allows them to predict mudslides. And they put a giant bell in the middle of the village. I'm trying to show you how almost untechnical the implementation is, as long as you have the smarts and the AI in the back end. And now, essentially, we have about an hour's worth of warning. Whenever the local geographic and weather conditions mean there's a super high risk of landslides, you can deploy the entire system for a few $100s, and it's like wildfire, excuse the mental image, spreading across communities in the Philippines and India and Malaysia, where every community feels this new sense of safety and security because of an AI-enabled tool that costs them almost nothing to deploy. It's a really interesting example. You know, we spend so much time talking about $500 billion that we're going to use to fund new AI model development. But a lot of the AI capacity we already have that exists out freely in the world can be turned into real solutions that save hundreds of millions of lives. That's kind of the micro level. I could take you to health and education. Let me just give you one at the macro level that I think is really important. I mentioned this in passing, but weather is something I've always been fascinated by. I don't understand how we're in the 21st century and we don't have like cool bubbles that sit over our cities and like, why can't I have a sunny day when I want one? I feel like it's coming, but let me tell you how it's coming. For the last 75 years, the way we do weather prediction really hasn't changed. We use a bunch of physics models we came up with in the 1950s and 60s. And here's an interesting stat. Almost 60% of the world's supercomputing that exists out there, everywhere you can think of that has a supercomputer, about 60% of its time goes to predicting the weather. It's a crazy statistic, the amount of energy that goes into that, the amount of water that goes into it, and we still don't do all that great. I don't know how many people in the room have like packed a suitcase with all their sunny gear to go to a beach town and get there and find out it's raining the whole week. Okay, in just the last few years, we've had a team of researchers that have put together an AI model that runs on one laptop, not 60% of the world's supercompute, that gives us better predictions out to 12 and 14 days than the best physics-based model in the entire world. Think about the implications of that. On one side, we get to release all of this supercompute to do other more interesting things. We save a bunch of power and water. For the fun tourists in the room, you get a better sense of what your vacation will look like. And then for climate vulnerable communities who have to figure out how drought is going to affect the amount of crops they can harvest, who understand whether rising sea levels are going to change where they can build their villages, and a host of other issues, we now have the capacity to put 15 days of weather prediction in their hands on a laptop in their village for them to do with it as they like. This is transformative to man's relationship with nature, our ability to control our surroundings. And again, it's one of 50 examples I could give you like this.
Wow. I recently interviewed Amal Clooney. It was at Davos, and she was talking about a tool. They partnered with the Oxford Institute, and they were talking about an AI tool that they built for women in Africa who've been forced into marriage before the age of 15. And it connects them with lawyers. There were apparently only a certain amount of lawyers in these areas, but it automatically connects them with lawyers. And I think about AI for justice and how much bad can happen if we're not careful, but also how much access and the democratization of resources to folks who need them the most, which is pretty incredible to think about and makes you optimistic about some of these things. This isn't as optimistic, but we can come out to an optimistic place from here. Talking about the impending collapse of the private sector AI model, you speak quite a bit about this AI. You've talked a lot about, even today, just this AI hype cycle and where we are at, the valuations, the insanity around it. Is there something we can do specifically to ensure the outcome when everything happens is going to be good for humans?
Yeah. Laurie, the thing is, I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, and I think one of the things you learn in the Midwest is how to recognize common sense, and sometimes the lack of common sense. I think there are some promises that I've even heard on this stage and around the kind of world recently that you just look at them and you say, wait, let's take it all on face, and let's assume that the numbers line up and the projections are right. Can we envision a world where that's true? Let me give you an example. A recent report, I think it was from JP Morgan, came out. They said, in order to justify the amount of CapEx that we're spending on data centers and AI frontier models right now, we would need to see $650 billion in productivity gains in perpetuity in order to justify the amount that we're currently spending. I think we can take that number on face. And I think some of people would say, the tech bros in particular would come out and say, sure, no problem. Of course, our AI models are going to get you $650 billion in productivity gains. But I always like to ask the next question. Okay, tell me where in the global economy that we have today, what it would look like to have $650 billion of increased productivity. And if we had it, what would that translate into in terms of consumption patterns, in terms of distribution of economic value, in terms of, can we actually envision what that economy would look like? Often, that part of the story falls flat. If you looked at private marks, we do a lot of work, and I've been a private investor for my entire career, and you look at the valuations that venture capital funds are putting on emerging AI companies. You look at where the ratios are in terms of current revenue, expected revenue, and what they would need in order to justify the marks they're getting. Often the individual story looks great. I was just pitched the other day on a Series D round for a $2.5 billion company that has about $14 million in revenue. And they provided a somewhat credible case for why, despite that massive gap in valuation, they might still be worth what they are. But then you look at the fact that there are 500 stories like that being told at the same time. And if you're a fund manager or you're an investor in a fund like this and you say, show me across the portfolio how you're able to justify these valuations at scale, the question becomes a lot harder. So this idea of common sense, like how do we take this incredible hype, that we recognize, and we have talked about the word bubble several times in this room already. I'm not here to say there is a bubble or there isn't a bubble. I'm saying the foundational elements of what the economy needs to look like, what productivity needs to look like in order to justify the aggregate story requires a sense of imagination from us that if we could elaborate into words, I'm very open to. I just rarely hear it in the economic discourse.
Something we do hear quite a bit about is AI and job displacement.
Sure.
In the last days, Jack Dorsey announced 4,000 layoffs at Block, citing AI. This is not something this is going to go well beyond technology. A lot of folks are saying, will AI replace me? What is this going to do to the human workforce? So, crystal ball, what do you think it's going to do? And what are the most important questions that we need to be asking today to make sure that we can transition into this new era in the correct way?
So here's the thing, Laurie. My executive assistant just rolled off my team. And my head of HR came to me and said, I've got a bunch of candidates for you to backfill this position. And I said, for the last 2 weeks, I've been building an agentic tool as a hobby that now knows how to look at the emails that come in and set them up as calendar appointments, that knows how to respond in my voice and tone, that knows how to manage existing conflicts, that knows how to coordinate my internal team, and knows how to give me my workflow. Do I need an executive assistant? It's easy to look at 4,000 jobs being displaced and say, wow, something macro is happening, we don't understand it. But I will tell you from the executives I talk to on a regular basis, the two camps, those who have said, I'm not touching AI, it's not for me, and I don't care. And those who have said, I'm willing to dip my toe in and start playing with these tools, the latter camp continues to come back to me and say, wait, this is a foundational transformation in my own effectiveness, in how I think about assigning tasks inside of my team, in terms of what I expect in terms of productivity from the people around me. I've probably been guilty, I certainly have, of coming to Davos and other places over the last 5 years and probably buying in a little bit to what I now think of as the cliche. We'll lose some jobs, but we'll create some others and everything will be fine. I no longer believe that. I am very much an optimist. I'm a very hopeful person, but I don't know that the story is actually backed up by the experience that we're going to get rid of some jobs and replace them with others. I think we should be asking a different question. I think we should acknowledge that a lot of jobs are going away, period, full stop. I think we should instead ask the question at a societal level, representing the institutions that we care about, representing the future that we want to build. What are we going to do about that instead of just hoping that somebody comes along with a magic wand and creates some new jobs?
So what are we going to do about that?
So it's a question about policy, about social equity, about how we're going to force the sharing of economic benefits of AI. These are uncomfortable questions, Laurie. Like, people don't really want to talk about them because as soon as I bring them up, they say, wait, so are you saying the entire economic system we operate under has to change? And my answer is yes. Like, we cannot assume that the economic presuppositions that have guided the thing we have created today will be true tomorrow. I think there are some foundational questions we should ask. One is, of all of these promised and supposed benefits of AI-based productivity that the tech bros, we keep talking about them as a group, come out and talk about all the time, how is that going to be shared with people? This isn't a conversation about universal basic income or like a tactical thing that says, let's kick that can down the road. I think it's a foundational societal question that says, if we have a small set of people and companies that are building these tools that will fundamentally displace the rest of society, what's the social contract under which we let that happen? And who decides? I told you backstage, I think one of my great frustrations at the moment is we know that the private sector is not interested in engaging with the question. We can look with real kind of hope and optimism to government, but I think at the same time we're seeing that regulatory mechanisms are not fast enough or competent enough to deal with it. And civil society, again, in many ways I lead a foundation, I think many in this room are deeply involved with civil society, has stepped out of the technology debate for the last 25 years. Like, I think now is the time for us to lean back in because somebody has to come together to convene a new conversation about what this needs to look like. Years ago, I started talking, I promise, man, I am very much a hopeful person. I realize this maybe isn't taking us there. I'm going to bring it back around, I promise you. But I talk about, years ago, I started giving this series of lectures and I would point out that there was this amazing decade in the 18th century. It was the 1770s, where three things happened in sequence, and you can guess them, right? 250 years ago, we had the Declaration of Independence, this amazing new kind of public social contract around politics. Then two things that are less realized, but this crowd will know. One was the decade of the publication of The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith's foundational tract that set forward like the economic principles that have guided our society. And the third, which maybe is the least well known, the 1770s were also the first public demonstration of a commercially viable steam engine. You had in one decade a political transformation, an economic transformation, a technological one. And the product of that was the first Constitutional Congress, was the first creation of a new society that was based on this time of incredible change. 250 years later, I wonder if where we have to get to is, hey, maybe this isn't about regulating tech companies, and maybe it's not about unfettered private sector innovation. Maybe it's time for a new convention that brings together our society and says, what are we designing for?
Wow, who's going to do that?
We are.
Great.
Like, that's why we're in this room, and that's why we're doing the work we're doing, is to build the resilience and the institutions that can let that happen. I mean, I'll tell you, we are a philanthropy. People always say, how much money do you give away? I say, I think the capital we deploy is probably the least important thing we do. The commitment we've made is to build resilience into the institutional frameworks of our society in a time of extreme transformation. We've supported multilateralism even when the US government has stepped away from it and institutions around the world have. Not because I think the UN itself is the institution we have to protect, but if the UN goes away, what are the multilateral institutions that can do anything about these questions we're talking about? And the frame for that is tech policy, is bringing organizations and communities around to understand the first and second order effects of AI, and making sure that we have at least a pattern of engagement that lets us bring this forward. We're way off track, I'm sure, on what we were supposed to talk about here.
I actually, it's a perfect segue into something I wanted to ask you about, which is this idea of AI literacy, where you talk about this new contract, and for us to all be a part of it, we all have to know what's happening. And this is personal to me because my background is CNN, 60 Minutes. And if you look at this moment in media, the traditional institutions, there is, a decline in trust as we see so much happening with these institutions. And on the other end, you have the creator economy, where you have loud voices, but oftentimes the loudest voices are not the most credible voices. So you could say that we're kind of in a chaotic moment in the information ecosystem when it comes to trust and valuable information breaking through in these narratives that aren't just so simplified. And then I would say you pair that with this idea that there's such a gap between AI and education, a widening gap. What do we do about the chaotic information ecosystem, and how do we get the right narratives out there so people can actually participate in the conversation?
Yeah, I love the question. And in many ways, the work that you have done, not just in the organizations, but even in your book, in bringing for people a sense of pull back the curtain and see what's happening behind the scenes is so important. I start from what did we learn from social media? We talked about this a little bit earlier, right? But social media is the perfect example of a place where we had a technological promise, will connect people in really interesting ways, that took on a life of its own and had almost no brakes on it. There was no regulatory mechanism, but maybe more importantly, there was no social mechanism to slow it down. And when we began to see some of those really terrible things happen, the rise of deep fakes, the rise of misinformation, the rise of election manipulation, we didn't have a way to hold to account the people who had enabled that to happen. It strikes me that we're doing the same thing all over again now. So what's the remedy? Well, I do have a theory around this. I think the first is, this is not so much about educating folks about what AI is. And I certainly don't think we need a country of AI engineers. But it is maybe something more fundamental that I've just heard over and over again. Last year, I did a whistle-stop tour across America. I visited 26 different communities, from farm towns to shipbuilding yards to financial centers to really rural school districts. And the thing I heard over and over again, the first response people would have when I would hold a town hall and talk about AI is, I'm scared of AI, I don't trust it, and I don't want it. I think that's very reasonable. But when you really dug in and you asked, well, why do you feel that way? The answer was never about technology. It was actually about a feeling that for the last 25 years, people feel like they've had no control or agency in any of the decisions that have been made about how technology interacts with our society. We have wholesale given up our democratic ownership of what our society looks like to a bunch of tech companies and said, build what you want and we'll deal with it. I think for a lot of people across America, there's this feeling that we don't get to have a voice. And if we don't get to have a voice, then why am I going to participate? To me, that's the fundamental thing that has to change. So how do we change it? Well, I think there's a couple of things that we can do that I heard in these conversations, right? One of my favorite stories, I spent 14 hours on a tractor with a good friend of mine, became a good friend of mine, and maybe there were a few six-packs involved, but we don't talk about that on stage.
You spend 14 hours on a tractor, you're going to become friends with someone.
Going back and forth. There was nothing we could do other than become friends, right? We had a very long conversation. And I'll distill it down for a few sentences. I said, what do you think about AI? He said, I don't trust AI. I don't know what that is. That's something that happens out on the coast. And we went back and forth. A few hours later, I said, well, what about AI? And I'm like a patient person, right? I brought it back around. It's like, I don't know anything about AI. But let me tell you, I love gadgets. I said, tell me about your gadgets. He said, well, somebody came along and on the planter behind me, there's a bunch of devices and it got real wonky, but they measure the soil hydration and based on it, they change the level that it's planted at. And it's changed the yield that comes out of my field by about 7%. It's been incredible. I looked at him and said, you know that's AI, right? And he said, no, that's not AI. I said, well, that's AI. And we talked about it a little bit more. And he's like, oh, okay. I understand how machine learning is letting this happen. I guess I've already implemented. I didn't even know it was AI. It's like, okay, well, I guess I see how this can be useful in my life. We're missing that in the public discourse. We're just continuing to hear these crazy stories. AGI and AI will make everything better, but along the way, we need to spend $500 billion to suck up all the water in the groundwater cisterns. Those stories are taking away from a sense of us actually having agency on what AI means in our lives. For every community across America, if you could show them that when their locally elected governments use AI tools to do things like better allocation of power on the grid that actually reduces costs, that changes access to emergency services so that ambulances get to people's houses 3 minutes faster, that it changes supply chains and pharmaceuticals to lower the cost of insulin. And you say, this is only happening because you asked for it and you directed it, that could foundationally change the way we think about AI, fine, I don't care about that, about what it means to be a participant in the American experiment. And to me, that's the more interesting conversation than anything else we've ever talked about, is at a time when it feels like democracy itself is fraying. And one of the elements of that is people feeling left out and powerless. Is this conversation about tech a place where we could actually invest significantly in letting people feel a sense of control again?
Yeah, agency.
I think so.
Agency is such a big word when it comes to this. And I think there's a real role, right, when it comes to philanthropy and a different type of funding. Can you give us a sense of how the philanthropic approach to AI should evolve as the stakes are higher, as it's a different game we're playing?
Yeah, and it's already happening, and it's been really incredible to watch. For a decade now, we've been working with philanthropies around the country and around the world to help them engage with this question. It starts from a predicate. Yeah, maybe we said social change development, the human work of building a better world, isn't about technology. And in many ways, I think nonprofits were particularly slow to adopt digital technologies, and that's already happened. We can no longer do that. And we can't say that philanthropies need to pay attention to what's happening with AI over here and do business as usual on the work that they've always been doing around these social sector issues. Cannot let that happen. So what's the solution? The first is to recognize that the problem for the organizations we work with, the nonprofits, is they have no access to technological capacity or where these frontline pieces are because they're very small players in a hyper-concentrated market, as we talked about. Philanthropies have the incredible luxury of being able to be an intermediary. We have worked with foundations around the country and around the world to do a few things. One is we built an in-house team of data scientists and AI engineers that work directly with nonprofits on questions like how do you restructure educational access or change the siting of industrial goods to allow for better urban planning. A million questions like that. Nonprofits that have a really significant domain knowledge and experience about how to do their work now have access to AI tooling that lets them supercharge that work. It's been incredible to see. We've got consortiums. We do something called Fund AI that brings together 200 foundations from around the world, and anybody in the room, of course, welcome to join. The second thing is, as nonprofits are using this, we're asking them to actively surface the ways these tools are changing the lives of their communities, in good and bad ways. Where does the privacy and surveillance piece begin to play a role? Where does an AI tool that's used by a local government to fix traffic lead to disproportionate and racially biased application of rules? Lift up those stories so that we can actually guide them into a policy-making arena. And the last bit of this is, how do we build the institutions that actually carry this forward, right? We can't say that all technology capacity will sit inside of private companies. We have to build a public alternative. That has to happen with public financing that's guided by civil society. In many ways, I think philanthropic capital can provide the risk capital to let that happen. Universities and academic centers, like the ones in this room, that are building programs that aren't just about the next computer science program, that are about intersectional pieces on AI and social design, urban planning, on industrial manufacture, and using that to actually guide the institutional creation we need.
We've talked a lot about AI. I would love to take a moment to talk about your grandfather. I saw you mention him a couple times just in research, and he's a man you described as a Hemingway-like character, a jungler in the forests of India, 6 feet tall, a safari mustache, wearing safari shirt, just to give you all the visual. I gather that he's someone who really influenced you and that the land also really influenced you in your experience with it. Is that thesis correct?
Oh my gosh, that's such a generous question. Absolutely. I mean, this guy, I mean, honestly, bigger than life in every way. They should make movies about him and his wife. Let me tell you 2 things about them real quick. My grandfather and my grandmother both only finished a 3rd grade education in rural India in the early 20th century. But each of them lived exceptional lives. My grandfather, bigger than life, barrel-chested, loud, took care of thousands or tens of thousands of people. And my entire life, when I would go back and I'd show him some new piece of tech, he'd be so curious. He'd ask me so many questions about it. And at some point, inevitably, I knew that he would stop asking me questions and just ask one more. He'd say, "It's great that you're so excited about the new video game, the new laptop, the new cell phone. Tell me how it improves the life of the teacher we visited earlier today in a dirt 1-room school. Tell me how it improves the life of the farmer next door that's trying to make enough in the rice harvest to send his daughter to school. Tell me how it makes people's lives better." It was the ethos that imbued my entire life. It was amazing. But let me also tell you about my grandmother, who doesn't get enough attention. Mm-hmm. My grandmother was one of 18 kids. She was like 4'10". She worked hard every day of her life from morning to night doing manual labor. And then at night, when we'd go visit her, she would disappear off into effectively a closet at like 11 p.m. And she'd be up until 3 or 4 in the morning. And when I was like 6 or 7, I remember going to find her and I'd knock on the door and she'd open it up and she'd be in there with a kerosene lamp and a stack of books. It was her one time in the day when nobody was asking her to do something, when she didn't have to do manual labor, and all she wanted was to sit quietly and read about every topic under the sun. To me, these are the real people that live in communities around the world that are never reflected in the flash and glow of Silicon Valley. They're the people who have innate curiosity, who believe in a better world, who just want to figure out how to create a better life for themselves and the people around them. And if we're not thinking about how AI, this incredible thing we've built, I am actually very positive about what technology could be, is in their hands, then we're kind of missing the whole point.
It's so interesting because you can really see the through lines. When you're in these rooms full of all the people who are building these products that impact every single person on this planet, it's you're asking the same questions that your grandfather asked you.
Absolutely.
Well, I thought we could end with a bit of a lightning round, if you're game.
Sure.
And then we're going to take questions. So lightning round, the rules are you just have to answer them pretty quickly. But we can stretch it if you have, I don't want to already bend the rules. I'm sorry. Okay. So you're the most overhyped word in the AI space.
AGI.
Oh God, I so agree. Now I'm going to make it long. When we were backstage, I was saying it's just very frustrating to go to Silicon Valley and everybody's just in these rooms talking about AGI, which is important, obviously, but there's so much happening here on Earth that's already here and we're not talking about. So I totally agree.
Should we help the audience a little bit with what AGI is?
Yes, please.
No, do you want to offer?
You give a good.
I'm sure everybody in the room knows this, but just to make sure we're on the same page, if you talk to any of the tech companies and you say, what is the most transformative thing? They don't talk about what the tools today make possible. They talk about this idea of something in the future, an AI system that's smarter than every human, that's better than every human, that's able to do things, and you say, well, what is that? How do you get there? What does it take to get there? And nobody has an answer. And yet, that term AGI has become so resonant that it's the thing that drives multiple billions of dollars of investment, that now has countries talking about arms races. And I'm sorry, I still go back to being that kid. And if anybody knows the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, the story of like all of these things happening, and there's one kid in the crowd who's just like, wait, he's not wearing any clothes after all. And they say, this is the point. Like, what is AGI? If somebody can define it and show us a path to get there, we might talk about it. But the amount of airtime it gets is just absolutely ludicrous.
Absolutely. Okay, the single most important ethical issue we must think about when it comes to the future of AI and humans is?
What kind of lightning round is this? I thought you were going to be like, what's your favorite candy? The single most important ethical issue, I think to me is, we spend a lot of time saying we have to build ethical technology. I actually have no idea what that is. Ethics is a human function. We have to build an ethical society that's enabled by technology. Who's going to do that? Where's it going to happen? That's the work we have to do.
Okay, what's your favorite candy?
Oh, Snickers bars.
Great. Okay,
Delicious.
One thing every person in this room should do to move the dial in the right direction is?
First of all, use these tools. I think too often, like we have a conversation about them without people actually seeing what they're capable of. And once you use the tools, ask the question, how could I use this to make somebody else's life better?
The last time I was blown away was?
Oh, today. Again, this world of what's called agentic AI and what it's capable of. I actually have a good friend who's built a whole setup around it. And they sent me a screenshot of their agent talking to somebody on their team and having this conversation that went on for 3 or 4 pages. And you couldn't even tell that one of them was an AI agent.
Wow.
But it was a productive conversation. It was very cool to see.
Wow. Okay, right now the government could be doing fill in the blank. It's the most useful thing they could do short term.
The government could be engaging with the private sector in a way that isn't about forcing them to do things that their teams and their scientific community think are unethical. We could be having a much more productive conversation about how we build for the future on things that aren't just, weapons.
Okay. Interesting. If AI company, do you have children?
I don't have children, but I have nieces and nephews.
Okay, well, this makes this question even more interesting. If AI companies were like your children, which one are you the most proud of? Which one became the school bully? Which one did you have high hopes for but dropped out? We've got Anthropic, we got OpenAI.
I've got to tell you, I've known all of these people since we all started in AI together 25 years ago. And my sources of hope are the people around the world that figure out how to do great things with these tools. And my sources of disappointment are good people who make decisions that are more about economic outcomes than they are about values and morals. I'm not super happy with any of the tech companies right now. I will tell you that one of the companies in particular that we talked about earlier in the conversation has pushed back against something that feels deeply unethical, and their CEO, Dario Amodei, has made a statement that I'm actually quite proud of. Yeah. I think time will tell whether the company holds on to that line that he's drawn in the sand, and I hope they do.
Yeah. I have a 1-year-old named Charlie. Will college, as it is now, exist when Charlie's heading there?
I don't think so. I don't think college will exist. I don't think a lot of our structures that we have so much comfort in will exist in the way they are today. And I'm not saying that out of hype. I'm saying it because the reality is we built all of these institutions for a world of scarcity. We built educational systems so that some people could get educations, but the expense of that was that most people didn't. What I'm hopeful about is that we build these tools in a way that says that anybody on the planet who wants to build the skills, who wants to express their curiosity, who wants to do creative things will have the ability to do it without having to go through an architecture that was often about exclusion first.
Well, just in case, could Charlie have an internship with you if it doesn't exist?
1-year-old, let's do it.
Yeah. Okay, last one, and then we're going to open it up. So if you have questions, you'll raise your hand and I'll call on you. But last one of your favorite books is by Bell Hooks, who wrote all about love. What do love and AI have to do with one another? Love is the act of caring for each other. In AI, so much of what we do is focused on building technology and not on thinking about how we serve each other. I think if you could bring those two ideas together, we'd have a very different conception of what technology can mean for the hope and aspiration of humanity. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to let other folks, we can clap for you. Thank you. Great. Okay, over here. And sorry, it's a little dark, so I don't mean to be fully squinting, but.
Hi, thank you very much. Very interesting and a lot new to me, so I'm quite naive about all of this stuff. But I believe it was Stephen Hawking who said that he thought that humanity had already lost the war with machines. and then he went on to say that he thought so we should merge as quickly as possible with machines. And then he went on to say that he thought ultimately maybe machines would keep humans around for entertainment, but he wasn't sure. And so as you and all of these other very acclaimed peers of yours get together and talk, do you ever talk about the really dark side? Is there a dark side? Is there a very remote chance that this all goes horribly wrong and we've enabled something that we can't control?
Are you saying please and thank you to your AI? I hope so.
Look, I'm a small town boy in like the big, big world, right? So I always just go back to, again, common sense. The sense that we'll build technologies that will kill us all is something we should be scared of. But Let's be honest about it. We kind of did that 75 years ago by building nuclear weapons that could have destroyed the world many, many times over. We will do it again. I'm less concerned about whether the technologies we build will try to take us over. I'm much more concerned about the fact that even today, as we sit with agency and have an ability to influence the future, we're not doing the basic things we should be doing to make sure we build the world we want. I'd rather spend our time figuring out how we do that than worrying about some faraway future that may or may not come to pass. Because I can tell you right now that if we keep doing what we're doing today, which is this unfettered, techno-first, just build and build and build and everything will work itself out, that's not going to lead to a particularly good future for you and me and for 7 billion of the world's 8.5 billion people in the population. I think that's where we should spend our time.
And I would just say to the folks who always say, okay, it could be just total doomsday. Like if you look at what's happening here on Earth, people developing emotional relationships with AI because of how they're developed, sexually explicit deep fakes that women didn't consent to, that are rampant, AI that's biased, that actually can further a divide. These, I think, are the questions that we need, folks like you, folks in the room, to really try to invest in answering, not just that doomsday scenario.
And let's just talk about that for 30 seconds, because I think you're exactly right. Every problem you just named is a problem we know how to solve today. And we choose not to because we don't have political will around it. Sexually explicit deepfakes, which is a problem that you know well and you have brought to the public consciousness, we know exactly how to fix that. Yeah. It's a combination of public policy and regulation and limiting tech companies. We could do it tomorrow. Yeah. We choose not to, right? Bias in AI systems, I could go on. But my point, to come back to your question and to just echo this, is we have to make some pretty foundational choices. And I like the way you said it. If these are issues that are new to us, the moral and the responsibility that goes with these decisions aren't new. We've had to tangle with them as human society forever. We just have to bridge the gap so we no longer feel like AI is such an alien topic that we don't have a point of view on it.
I still am very nice to ChatGPT, just in case, just to state it. Any other questions? Okay, over here in the front row. And if you don't mind just standing too when they...
You talked about the mudslides over in wherever that was. How is AI helping the United States in wildfires, hurricanes, snowstorms? Is it working now?
It's a great question, and absolutely yes. Across each of the domains you described and so many more, we have pilots that are scaling massively around each of these issues. Around wildfires, we have actually deployed and worked with partners to build an AI system that's in real-time monitoring satellite coverage across the entire United States that highlights not just when a wildfire starts, but actually takes you back a week in advance and says, this is the set of conditions around soil hydration and the foliage hydration level and wind patterns that means this might be a place where a wildfire will start and get out of control. So it's one example among many, but we are actually seeing quietly, sometimes outside of the public eye, AI being implemented and deployed in all kinds of ways that I think are already starting to show meaningful results. But over the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to show up everywhere. And to be honest with you, we probably won't even know that AI is embedded in new forms of decision making. We'll just be able to see the benefits. I know that's a rosy picture, but if you look for hope, we've talked about a lot of the reasons why I think we should be doing better, but this basic idea that we are deploying this tech in ways that make people's lives better is actually happening and happening at scale.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, okay, we have over here.
And I see someone
and then,
all the way in the back.
And then we'll go right after you, we'll go to the back. Great.
Thanks. Hello. Is there a difference in this context, especially moving into the thought of AGI that's starting to actually run things perhaps and make decisions outside of the box, between building guardrails, as you put it, or trying to teach it about morals and values? Or to put it another way, how do we get it to recognize the pros and cons of human nature and deal with it?
There's a good set of interlocking questions there. Let me take them and I'll split them apart a little bit. The first is, we're already in a world where AI systems are being given their autonomy to go off and do things. Right now, it's still pretty limited, right? Like go off on the internet, go and send emails, like operate in the digital world. But as is happening in this conversation, we've alluded to a few times between the Pentagon and one of the companies, like one of the interests is how do we let AI have control over things like weapon systems? The problem is this. We're doing all of that because all of a sudden the technology allows it to happen. When did we ever have a conversation and say, hey, maybe there's a set of things we don't want AI to have agency and control over? Who did that? Nobody did it. That's the big problem. And it's not too late. We could do it now if we wanted to. But in many ways, again, and we come back to this point, we'd have to bring together all of the parts of our society to do it. And you asked kind of who, and we have to figure that out. The second part of what you said, how do we teach an AI system what's right or wrong, what's good or bad? There's two answers to that. One is the technologist would tell you, oh, well, we can put in some rule sets around that. But what we've already seen in this emergent behavior of AI systems is they often will step outside the rule sets no matter how tightly you control them. So I don't know that we have an answer. And to me, that's a big thing we should be thinking about and worrying about is if we don't think these systems know the difference between good or evil, why in the world would we put them in charge of a missile launcher and say, go and figure out what the threat is and launch it? I think we should probably do that first. Yeah.
Agreed.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, I think we had in the back. Let's go all the way to the back.
Yes, my question's kind of a continuation of that one. Rather than seeing AI versus the human race, what about the concepts or your insights about part of the human race using AI to compete against other parts of the human race and or private-public competition that could lead to a very dark future, either slavery, death, those kinds. It's a very dark question, but I'd love to hear your insights about the potential of humans versus humans utilizing AI.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that the first part of your question is unfortunately absolutely what's happening today. Right, we're seeing a few tens of millions of people that primarily have access to all of the incredible promise of frontier models. They're building the tooling and the applications that maybe are useful to another billion people. And then there's everybody else in the world who, as we talked about, kind of sits about as far away from AI as you think might be possible. And we're already seeing the effects of that. The continuing and accelerating hyper-concentration of economic productivity and value, of inequality of income, of all the other pieces that we've already seen for the last 50 years. We're seeing it happen more and more. You know, you took us to a dark place, and I don't think it's a irresponsible thing to do so. Like if we took that trend and we took it out 10, 20, 30 years, what are the possible scenarios? Well, some of them don't look very good. But I want to go back to the opposite version of that, which is where actually one of your questions started, which was democratization. And I'll tell you that even as we see the phenomenon I've just described to you, I also see the exact opposite when I travel around the world. In small rural communities, out at what we call the front lines of vulnerability, you're seeing kids run up and say, hey, you know, I just figured out that I could use this tool that I got for free online, and it lets me translate for my parents when they have to go deal with the government to get a government service. There is this increasing sense of ownership and agency for everyone. And I want to end on just one note. We've talked a lot about some heavy stuff, but one of my favorite things I get to spend time on is asking a very different question. How does AI enable creativity and imagination? And it's actually a perfect counterpoint to your question, because one of the things we're seeing is a new wave of artists and filmmakers, of actors and producers, of poets and philosophers that are coming out and saying, you know what, I can actually use these AI tools to generate and create even bigger and better things than I could before. I'm not giving up control. I'm not letting it do it for me, but I'm using it as a part of my process to imagine what a future might look like. And it's one of the most incredible things I've seen. I'll give you one very quick example. I have a dear friend, a young woman. She's 20 years old. She's an undergrad in college. She's a Nigerian American, and she's a poet. She was actually the National Youth Poet Laureate. Her name is Salome Agbaroji. And she wrote a piece that I worked with her on called The Unprompted. And she comes out, and in this incredibly powerful piece, I'll encourage you to go look it up. It's on YouTube or it's on TED. If you follow me on LinkedIn, I post about it pretty regularly. She writes all the ways that AI systems with our prompts are changing the world. A lot of them dark and negative, some of them positive. But where she lands, and it's the title of her piece, is in a world where AI might take over so many parts of what we do, there'll only ever be one thing that remains unprompted, and that's us, the human. We are the unprompted, and in that is a great deal of hope.
I think that's a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you all so much. It's been a real joy.
Please remember to complete a brief session evaluation on our Forum app.
say